March 23, 2020. The streets are unusually quiet. Inside a sealed conference room at the Mariner S. Eccles Federal Reserve Building, the air is tense, heavy with urgency, calculation, and unspoken fear. Phones vibrate. Screens glow red. Numbers scroll downward faster than anyone can read them. Outside these walls, the global economy is freezing in real time. Stock markets have collapsed more than 35% in weeks. Credit markets are seizing. Airlines are grounded. Supply chains are snapping. For the first time since the Great Depression, policymakers are staring into an abyss they cannot fully see. At precisely this moment, the Federal Reserve makes an announcement that will redefine money, markets, and wealth for a generation. 3 words: unlimited quantitative easing. There is no vote by Congress, no national address, no public debate. Yet within months, more money will be created than in the entire previous century combined. And almost no one will notice until years later, when the consequences arrive in their rent, groceries, mortgages, and shrinking savings. This is not a story about inflation as an abstract force. This is a story about where money enters the system first and who it leaves behind. In 2020, a typical American home cost roughly $300,000. By 2022, that same home would sell for $420,000 to $450,000. At first glance, it looked like prosperity. Rising asset values, booming markets, record-breaking stock indexes. But beneath the surface, something else was happening. Wages barely moved. Savings lost purchasing power. Living costs surged faster than paychecks. The paradox was impossible to ignore. Why did the economy feel worse for so many people, while financial markets were soaring? To understand that contradiction, we must trace the path of money, step by step, from its creation to its final impact. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913 to stabilize the financial system. Its mandate is narrow and technical: maintain liquidity, support employment, and preserve financial stability. But history shows that in moments of crisis, priorities shift. When markets threaten to collapse, the system does not ask who deserves support. It asks only one question: what must be saved to prevent total failure? In March 2020, the answer was clear: banks, bond markets, large financial institutions. Within weeks, the Fed's balance sheet begins expanding at a pace never before seen. From $4 trillion to nearly $9 trillion in under 2 years. Trillions of dollars are created electronically, keystrokes, replacing scarcity. Yet this money does not flow evenly into society. It enters through a specific doorway. The first recipients are not workers or small businesses. They are primary dealers, major banks, and financial institutions. This is not corruption. It is design. Newly created money always enters through financial channels, and whoever receives it first can deploy it before prices adjust. This phenomenon has a name: the Cantillon effect. First described in the 18th century, it explains a simple but powerful truth. Money is not neutral. Timing matters. Those closest to money creation benefit first. Those farthest away pay later, through higher prices. By the time wages rise, the damage is already done. As markets stabilize, asset prices surge. Stocks rebound, then explode upward. Real estate becomes a financial instrument. Debt becomes cheaper for those who already have collateral. Meanwhile, millions of households receive stimulus checks, helpful, but fleeting. A few $1,000s cannot compete with trillions. And so quietly, without headlines or alarms, purchasing power begins to slip away. Not evenly, not randomly, but systematically. This documentary is not an accusation. It is an examination, an exploration of how emergency policy decisions made in hours reshaped wealth, opportunity, and inequality for decades. We will follow the money, trace the mechanisms, study the outcomes, and ask a question that lingers long after the crisis fades. Was this inflation an unfortunate side effect or the predictable result of how the system is built? The answer lies not in conspiracy, but in structure. and once seen, it cannot be unseen. The moment the system froze. By mid-March 2020, the global financial system was no longer functioning normally. Equity markets were collapsing, but more alarming was what happened beneath the surface. Credit markets, the plumbing of modern finance, were seizing up. Companies could not roll over short-term debt. Even U.S. Treasury bonds, long considered the safest and most liquid assets in the world, began to behave erratically. For central bankers, this was the nightmare scenario. When Treasury markets malfunction, the system itself is at risk. Inside the Federal Reserve, urgency replaced debate. The goal was no longer efficiency or fairness. It was survival. The question was simple and absolute. How do you stop a financial heart attack? The answer, as it had been since 2008, was liquidity on a massive scale. Unlimited becomes policy. On March 23, 2020, the Federal Reserve removed the final constraint. There would be no preset limits, no defined endpoint, no numerical ceiling. Quantitative easing, once considered an extraordinary tool, became open-ended. Within weeks, the Fed was purchasing U.S. Treasuries mortgage-backed securities corporate bonds exchange-traded funds. This was not stimulus in the traditional sense. It was balance sheet expansion, money created electronically and injected into financial markets. Between 2020 and 2022, the Fed's balance sheet expanded by approximately $4.5 trillion, rising from around $4 trillion to nearly $9 trillion. This expansion happened faster than at any time in modern history. But the crucial detail was how the money entered the economy. How money actually enters the economy. The Federal Reserve does not send money to households. It operates through a network of primary dealers, large banks, and financial institutions. When the Fed purchases securities, it credits reserve accounts held by these institutions. New money is created, but it is created inside the financial system first. This design is not secret. It is foundational, and it produces predictable outcomes. Those who receive new money first can deploy it before prices rise. Those who receive it later encounter higher prices with unchanged purchasing power. This mechanism was identified centuries ago by economist Richard Cantillon. Today, it remains just as powerful. The Cantillon effect in real time. As liquidity flooded markets, asset prices responded immediately. Stocks rebounded with historic speed. By late 2021, the S&P 500 had risen more than 100% from its March 2020 lows. Real estate followed. Mortgage rates collapsed to historic lows. Investors, both institutional and individual, rushed into housing, treating homes not as shelter, but as yield-generating assets. Home prices rose 30 to 40% in many regions in less than 2 years. Those who already owned assets saw their net worth expand rapidly. Those who did not were left facing a very different reality. Wages versus prices. While asset prices surged, wages lagged. From 2020 to 2022, average wage growth ranged between 5 and 10%, depending on sector. During the same period, rent rose 25 to 30%, food prices surged, energy costs increased sharply. In real terms, purchasing power declined for most workers. This is the defining feature of inflationary wealth transfer. Prices move faster than paychecks. By the time wages adjust, living costs have already reset higher. Stimulus versus trillions. Households did receive support. Stimulus checks, expanded unemployment benefits, and temporary relief programs provided short-term stability. But the scale was asymmetrical. Total direct payments to individuals amounted to a few $1,000s per person. By contrast, trillions flowed into financial markets within weeks. Liquidity for institutions was continuous. Relief for households was temporary. The imbalance shaped outcomes. Housing, from shelter to financial instrument. Housing illustrates the transfer more clearly than any other sector. Low interest rates and abundant liquidity turned homes into speculative assets. Institutional investors entered the single-family housing market at scale, borrowing cheaply and buying aggressively. Prices surged. For existing homeowners, this looked like prosperity. For first-time buyers, it was exclusion. Down payments rose faster than savings. Mortgage payments doubled, then tripled as rates later increased. Ownership became unreachable for millions. The data confirms the shift. Federal Reserve data reveals the distributional impact clearly. Between 2020 and 2022, the top 10% of households captured the majority of wealth gains. The bottom 50% saw only marginal improvement. This was not due to differences in effort or productivity. It was timing. Those who owned assets when liquidity arrived benefited first. Rate hikes and the illusion of control. By 2022, inflation could no longer be dismissed as transitory. The Fed reversed course, raising interest rates aggressively. But the damage was already embedded. Asset prices did not collapse. Instead, affordability collapsed. Higher rates locked new buyers out while protecting existing owners. Inflation slowed, but inequality hardened. A structural pattern. This was not an anomaly. The same pattern appeared in 2008-2020. Each crisis followed the same sequence. Financial shock, massive liquidity, injection, asset stabilization, rising inequality. The system consistently prioritizes financial stability over purchasing power. The road not taken. An alternative existed. Direct, evenly distributed payments could have allowed households to participate in asset appreciation. Instead, money entered through markets. The result was predictable. The long-term consequences. Today, millions face permanent renting, reduced savings, higher debt burdens. Wealth concentration is not reversing. It is compounding. History often disguises itself as emergency. In moments of crisis, decisions are made quickly, quietly, and with narrow objectives. The intention is rarely malicious. It is usually pragmatic. Stabilize first. Ask questions later. But consequences do not care about intentions. They care about structure. The inflation of the early 2020s did not emerge from chaos. It followed a familiar path, one that has been repeated across crises, countries, and decades. When money is created, where it enters matters more than how much is created. That single detail explains why asset prices soared while wages lagged, why ownership was rewarded while labor was diluted, why stability for markets translated into instability for households. The system did exactly what it was designed to do. For policymakers, the mission was to prevent collapse. And in that narrow sense, the strategy worked. Markets survived. Banks remained solvent. Credit continued to flow. But survival is not the same as fairness. By protecting asset values first, the system transferred purchasing power away from those who rely on wages and savings. Inflation did not strike evenly. It moved along predictable lines, upward toward assets, outward toward owners, and away from labor. This is not a conspiracy. It is architecture. The tragedy is not that inflation happened. It is that the same mechanisms are likely to be used again. Because when the next crisis arrives, and the same constraints will apply, the same tools will be available, and the same institutions will stand closest to the source of newly created money. Unless that structure changes, outcomes will not. Understanding this does not require anger. It requires clarity. Inflation is not mysterious. Inequality is not accidental. Wealth concentration is not random. They are consequences of policy pathways chosen under pressure. For individuals, the lesson is sobering. Ownership matters more than effort in an inflationary system. Timing matters more than discipline. Proximity to money creation matters more than productivity. These truths are uncomfortable, but ignoring them does not make them disappear. For societies, the question is deeper. Can a system built to protect markets also protect purchasing power? Can stability be achieved without permanent inequality? Can future crises be addressed without repeating the same transfers? These questions remain unanswered. The inflation transfer of the early 2020s will not be remembered as a single event. It will be remembered as a turning point, a moment when millions realized that money is not neutral, Policy is not abstract, and economic outcomes are shaped long before prices appear on shelves. The next chapter is still being written, and understanding how this one unfolded may be the only way to read what comes next.